All right, so now it's time for round two.
Okay, here we are.
Here we are.
Second episode.
The last episode we kind of just spoke at the high level about who we are and what we're trying to do, and what our business plan is, and we introduced the concept of the statutory analysis, which is going to be the primary object of focus for our discussions.
Yes.
So today we're going to actually dive into it. Okay. I want to say that I think marijuana is now legal in 16 jurisdictions.
17 jurisdictions.
Excuse me, 17, because
as of this week.
As of this week, what was the most recent?
Connecticut.
So I have not examined the Connecticut statute, but I did look at the statutes in the other jurisdictions where it's legal. Now, I didn't read them in as much depth as I've obviously read the New York statute, and I don't see any need to, because.
And why is that?
The reason why is if this were like a final exam at Harvard University and the state legislatures were the students in the exam, the final exam at Harvard Law School, New York would be the winner. In other words, they grade in law school, they grade everybody against the curve, and the A plus is the top of the class. And I'm saying New York the New York legislature here did an amazing job, and I think it's one of the most interesting things I've read in a long time.
Okay.
And
now, for the benefit of the user, you're not just saying that because you're a native New Yorker and you're prejudiced in favor of your state.
Absolutely not. And I'm not like I want to avoid politics as much as possible in our discussions, because I think that it stands alone just kind of as an example of legislation. No, I'm not saying that out of any sort of prejudice. I think that they have balanced competing political interests. They've included a discussion around all of the various branches of government. They've considered all of the implications and the second order implications. They've explored all of the nuances, and we're gonna talk about that.
Okay.
I'm going to try to present the legalese in a way that's interesting. What I want you guys to be able to do is listen to us, our analysis, and have an understanding of the law. That's why I have a joint, because I think the only way to properly analyze marijuana legislation is over a joint. I debated whether or not that was something that I want to do.
Via marijuana consumption.
I discussed this with you. You do not partake anymore.
Not anymore.
No.
To be fair.
That's
I
fine.
have enough memories I can probably live off of, just the secondhand smoke of my prior experience.
So I want to just, before diving into the content, I want to just sort of set some parameters around the context in which we're going to analyze this statute. Okay? Basically, I want to just analyze it on its face. Which is not possible for other pieces of legislation. For instance, the United States Constitution. You cannot just read that beginning to end without taking into consideration the centuries now of court decisions and legislation. But this statute is fresh. It has not passed through the courts. It is so, and it will, and we will revisit the various sections together as it does. But right now we're looking at it with fresh eyes. I am comparing it to a certain extent, like I said, to the other jurisdictions. I'm going to introduce that to a certain extent. However, if we start reading the statutes in the other jurisdictions, we'll be here forever. We are going to read the entire legislation, New York legislation, with one caveat. Where we approach significant legalese, I will summarize. For instance, when they talk about the medical identification card, there's a gigantic list of all the specific content that needs to be included in the card. Some of it's relevant, some of it we want to understand, some of it is we can summarize, etc.
Sort of like what I do with my web development clients.
Yes.
I mean, I can put things at a high level so they can understand it, but I'm not going to go into the deep dive of the underlying coding and how plugins plug into the codecs. So people would fall asleep. They're not trying to hear all that.
Well, right, but I also am saying, as a lawyer, I'm trying to empower the marijuana operators as much as possible. so that they can manage their businesses for themselves. Like, yes, we're trying to solicit their business to a certain extent, but on another level, if you actually just, my intention for this series is, if you take the time and just listen to it from start to finish, whatever that looks like, you will understand, first of all, our strategy for how you should approach the marketplace, as well as a solid legal understanding that any lawyer would be proud of.
Yes.
I'll even, where appropriate, talk to you about like the forms, for instance, that you have to fill out. We were going to discuss that in detail, so that you don't necessarily have to pay a $30,000 consulting fee to
He's not pulling that number out of the air. There are places nowadays that's what they charge just to process the paperwork for you, with no guarantee that you're actually going to get a license.
A big part of our preparatory conversations around starting a business was talking to other consultancies in other jurisdictions, and basically their only service offering for New York right now is, we'll help you prepare for a license, and it's like $30,000. So what we're doing is everything.
Everything.
Everything. Okay, we're from incorporation to building a website, to sales and marketing strategy, to ultimately in 18 months the license. But the way we're going to deal with the license application is ultimately what I'm also trying to do, and what I'm encouraging people to do in other states, is to come together as a class for the purposes of collective bargaining, right? Think of like a trade guild or a unionization. So that's one thing that we're doing. And look, I know $30,000 is a lot of money for a lot of people. Sure. We're not looking to take you guys in that kind of in that relationship. So the way we're going to mitigate against that cost is bring everybody together as a class and produce these videos examining what the application process looks like, so that you can do that without actually having to hire a lawyer. And I think that that's possible. We're not talking about a complex appellate brief that has to be filed with the Supreme Court of the United States, and it's going to come to that. And but that's when you need to call your lawyer. Obviously, I'm not going to encourage you guys to file briefs with but in terms of the application process. So,
and as I say to a lot of my business clients, we're not looking to make money off of you. We're looking to do business with you. And now with this partnership going a step even further, we're looking to, dare I say, build a movement.
Yes, well, that because the trend is towards legalization nationally, but that could be, that could go down in a number of different ways. It could be beautiful and easy, and it could be very, it could be a little more complicated than that. So what we're saying is, in order to initiate that movement, we want to start to create the class of marijuana operator, and our ultimate philosophy. I will highlight this again. We went into it in some detail in the last episode, and I'm going to
previous episode.
Yes, and I'm going to continue to revisit it. But basically, our philosophy is, if you're selling marijuana or growing marijuana, you should do so openly and transparently. You should begin to put aside funds for your taxes for this taxable year, and you should basically explain when you file your taxes where the revenue is coming from. To that, and you should begin to come together as a class for the purposes of collective bargaining, in case there is any pressure from the from law enforcement or anything like that. And I believe that by and also, and very importantly, is to also put aside start making charitable contributions as a class. That way, when I represent you as a class, or the class, you can say they've made millions of dollars in charitable contributions. When's the last time the tobacco vendors have done that, or the bars, etc.? I want the marijuana operators to prove that this was, excuse my French, bullshit legislation from the moment that it was passed throughout the entire history of its criminalization.
And just by way of a little digression to sort of explain where Sean's coming from, why he's so enthused about this. As we just mentioned, as of this date recording, this is the 27th of June, I believe, which is a Sunday. Tuesday of this week, Connecticut became the 17th state
as we said,
to legalize marijuana for recreational purposes. Now, let's put this in perspective. Of the 17 states, not including the District of Columbia, where it is legal for recreational purposes, 5 of those states legalized it this year, which means that in the past year, nearly a third of the states that have legalized it, we're only halfway through 2021. So this is a movement that's picking up pace. And one final thing,
Yes.
as Connecticut said, according to an article in Esquire on .com, the reasoning behind this was to redress the fact that the marijuana laws have been used disproportionately against minority communities and communities of color, which is why they're going to be releasing people, going to be doing the same thing that New York is doing. So this is social equity legislation on its face.
Yeah, and I think what I said about the New York statute really hammering that properly is I feel they really kind of thoroughly explained that and brought that to a workable solution in the statute. But to your point about what you said about Connecticut, yeah, that's why we are trying to focus this conversation around reparations. But it's changing the conversation. Because what we're saying is like, well, tell you what, like the government is kind of doing their job, it would seem. You want the reparations, you have to take an active role in making that happen. Not wait for the government to do that, but this is why I want to focus on charitable contributions, because if as a class of marijuana operators you are directing your discretionary revenue into what I would call reparations funds, into the communities that have been communities of color. How do we blue line the red line?
Yes, thank you. I like that phrase.
To do that yourselves, don't rely upon the government. That money that you spend, you get 90% of that back, and then the government gets what the government gets.
And as you're saying, it's not. As conversations we've had off camera, reparations, as I say, the root word of reparations is repair. The task of of repairing is not on the government. The government's job is to make good and to provide the funding. And this came to me actually a couple of days ago. Reparations is not about making good of what happened in the past. It's about giving the opportunity to create a better future. And I was thinking about this earlier today as I was...
Because you can't change the past.
Yes. Jerry, here's the thing, because we've talked about Tulsa, and this is the centennial commemoration of the Tulsa Massacre. And I said, the thing is, it's not about, reparations is not about paying for the destruction of Tulsa 100 years ago. It's about creating the opportunity to create the new Tulsa now.
I want to say one quick thing about Tulsa. That's a complex subject, and I think you and I should do a separate podcast series about that. A lot of you probably don't know the story about that, but there was apparently a city of black millionaires in 1921, and they were essentially...
just destroyed, massacred.
Yeah, for no reason other than basically being black millionaires.
What's
that?
Envy and
but it's a very interesting paradigm. It's a very interesting example from history that I think we can learn from right now, and that has lessons... application right now. The point is there was a city of black millionaires in 1921. There's no reason why we can't really empower what the legislation calls the social equity applicants. I want to define that broadly to say kind of all marijuana operators who have been, working for the past 20 years. I want to protect them as a class. I think a lot of them happen to be black and Spanish and minorities. Many of them are white, and I think there's plenty of market share to go around. But the point is, this is an opportunity to create a new class of wealth within the black community.
And they're all functional entrepreneurs. Because let's look, here we are, we're New York citizens. Look at what happened in Harlem on 125th Street. You had all the vendors selling their knockoff bags and their T-shirts and their glasses, and they were just doing up the deck table. And what did the city do? Did it round them up and criminalize them and said, no, get a license, wear a laminate on your chest, and continue doing business. So this is Sean's approach. It's like, you know what? Don't criminalize these people. Just say, you know what? You're here. Now we're going to grandfather you in. We're just going to make you legitimate. There's going to be a process that you're going to go through so that you're now paying your taxes and all this kind of stuff, and carry on.
And to the extent that the Democrats were the ones advancing this New York legislation and creating this class of social equity applicants, isn't that consistent with Republican laissez-faire economic
You
principles where you want to basically protect the market from doing what it's basically doing? And
historically, they're the party that tends to be on the side of business and economics and boosting the economic status of the United States.
Because who are the ones who are going to uproot them? It's not like there's a class of white people on Park Avenue who are going to come in. These are out-of-state operators from Colorado, California. You want them to take that away from your citizens? So,
if only as out of a sense of New York pride. Let's just be real.
So I think everybody's interests are really aligned here, which is why we're having a new conversation between people and government. I think everybody's more or less trying to do the right thing. This does dovetail with the next point that I wanted to get into, which is one thing that the state is very interested in, or certainly should be very interested in, is the taxable revenue. You and I went through a basic calculus around this, and I did prepare some notes because essentially the tax collection in New York State is projected to reach $350 million annually and potentially create $30,000 to $30,000 to 60,000 new jobs.
Right.
These numbers are wildly well, I don't know about the new jobs actually, but in terms of the taxable revenue, let me explain why the state got that completely wrong. Okay, there are about 8-9 million people in New York City.
Not New York State, just New York City.
Just New York, the 5 boroughs. Everyone smokes marijuana.
Dear God, it's
everyone?
Yes,
everyone. And obviously,
and it is no joke, folks. I'm an old guy, so I ride my bike about 2 hours a day to try to stay alive and get some cardio workout. And seriously, I ride along the bike paths on the east and west side of Manhattan. I ride through the city. You literally, I'm not exaggerating. This isn't hyperbole. You can't go a city block, in any direction without smelling people lighting up. And they're everywhere.
But it's a lot more than, let's say, 10%. And if it were 10%, that would be 1 million.
Right.
Okay, and let me explain something to you about marijuana. If you are smoking marijuana, like tobacco, you're not smoking marijuana. Like, I'm a marijuana smoker. I'm going to wait until we dive into the legislation, and then I'm going to light this up because, well, yes, for many reasons, but,
but like you said, cigarette smokers don't smoke 1 or 2 cigarettes a day.
No, and a marijuana smoker is typically smoking like I smoke, which is about 1/8 a day, and the typical price of 1/8 is between $30 and $50, and if just on that taxable revenue from sales tax, or we're going to talk about taxation later in terms of how we're calculating those numbers, but basically, if just from the sales taxes, not mentioning the farm, the distribution taxes, the manufacturing taxes, and all of that, you're talking about the billions. Yeah. You're talking about billions
with a B.
Billions of dollars.
Yes.
Okay. So for them to say that that's $300 million, it's so much more money than that.
Right.
And when you consider that from a national standpoint, and how that might even relate to the international marketplaces, I think you begin to understand how much is at stake here.
So, by way of comparison, remember we crunched the numbers a little bit, just a back of the envelope.
Right.
Illinois is a state. The total population of the state of Illinois is about 12,775,000. They are projected within a year or two to be in $2 billion of revenue from tax revenue. From now the 8 million New York City dwellers. Look, I don't have any hard facts, but that New Yorkers get high in much greater proportion than the folks in Illinois.
Well, right. So what you just did was presented hard data, right? So the conclusion that I drew, is ultimately questionable, but the hard data, and I wonder what
their numbers are low.
What's the revenue from California? I mean,
we'd have to look it up, but come on,
no, it's going to be a lot more than what they're saying.
And Colorado, which was one of the first prominent states to really go. It's not just that they made so much more money in tax revenue than they expected. The ancillary effects, the marijuana tourism. So people aren't going to Colorado just to ski the slopes. They're going there because it's legal to get high. That means that restaurants, hotels, entertainment all benefit from this boom of the influx of marijuana tourism.
And what's the dark side? So the dark underbelly. If you want to see the absolute dark underbelly of unmitigated marijuana abuse, come to New York City, go to Washington Square Park, at 3 o'clock in the morning. Okay, when people should be getting ready for sleeping, getting ready for work the next day. And you'll watch these crazy kids, and they're playing their music, and they're skateboarding all over the place. And there was an article in the New York Times that the kids were fornicating in the streets, Cornell. They were fornicating in the streets.
Well, well, as we said, if the kids are doing something in the streets, there's worse things they could be doing in the streets that start with an F.
And now speaking to the Democrats and the Republicans and the cops, and if children want to, young adults want, because children, that's actually a completely different story. I totally misspoke. No. But if consenting adults want to listen to loud music, smoke marijuana, and fornicate in the street, you better let them.
There's worse things that can happen, folks, and we don't even want to go down that.
Now, actually, I made a Freudian slip and I said children, but one thing that you do want to control with the legislation is marijuana abuse among minors. That is a serious problem. I have a very conservative attitude about that. I think schools, parents, and everybody who is essentially responsible for the lives of children, or essentially in the statute it's under 21. Maybe it could be it is under 21. That we should do everything in our power to stop that from happening. When I was in high school, marijuana abuse was a real problem. It was a problem for me, and it was a problem for my friends. And if it was legal and there was better education and it was handled differently, I don't know.
As we discussed, I'm 60 years old. Okay, when I was a wee one, I was able to go to the corner bodega and buy cigarettes and beer for my stepfather. Okay, that's not happening today because no one wants to lose their liquor or tobacco license selling to a minor because it's legal, because it's revenue, and they're not going to screw up their livelihood.
But someone selling a dime bag on the street doesn't really care. But actually, that's not, as a class, marijuana operators are all right, and I think a lot of them, would think twice.
Not a lot of them stand around junior high school selling dime bags to 10-year-olds.
No, but I do. What I am saying is that this is not a totally harmless thing.
Right.
There are in addition to protecting minors, there's also elements of legitimate marijuana addiction that have to be addressed. Just as there's issues with alcoholism and tobacco addiction.
And to your point, by legalizing it, making it legitimate, then we shift the focus, we change the conversation, and just like the fact that it's not that kids don't smoke cigarettes anymore, it's not that kids don't drink alcohol, but there is much less underage use of it because it's been legitimized, because it's been licensed, and we're taking it seriously. So if now you have to go to your local bodega or convenience store to get your weed, you're going to have people who look, because look, I said, the bodegas back in the day, they would sell you cigarettes because they knew my family, they knew who my stepfather was, they knew I wasn't smoking the cigarettes. But nowadays, you see that sign, you must be born after this date. They're not messing up with that because they know the authorities are going to come in and would shut them down. And they're like, I'm not going to lose my livelihood over selling you a pack of cigarettes.
I ultimately support very stiff penalties for violations of the law. Right now, I do think that the state and law enforcement should take a essentially a hands-off approach to the marketplace. Not unless that is what is happening.
Right.
But so if they see people selling marijuana on the street or vendors or tobacco proprietors selling marijuana, and I think they are taking a hands-off approach. Where I buy marijuana is literally from a tobacco store, and and he says that he has a good relationship with the police, and they don't care what he's doing as long as they don't find out that he's selling to children. Okay. I want to now shift the conversation to the legislation, which means we're going to have to talk about politics a little bit. And I can't really stomach.
Yes.
You know that I don't. I deleted my Facebook account.
Yes, you did.
You and I have. You're one of my dear friends.
We crossed swords in the past.
Which is why I'm no social justice warrior. This man could have me canceled probably if he pulled up some of the records of some of our.
They're still in my timeline, but I'm not going to throw them under the bus.
No, I think I deleted my account, so they disappear.
But anything that you sent to me is in my profile.
I thought it disappears after you delete your profile. So some of that stuff there's a permanent record there. Well,
Well, they say the internet is forever.
Well, I look honestly, folks. I've not always done the best job.
Put it mildly.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about politics, okay? And I don't want to. I'm staying away from invective, and attack.
And see,
Okay.
as we talk, there is discussing the process of politics, and as opposed to partisan dissent and dispute. Which is, so when we say political discussions, we're not talking about knives out, sharks versus jets kind of nonsense that American politics for the most part has devolved to. We're talking about the fact that there is a structure of rules and regulations that help, regulate a well-behaved, civilized society.
And I have a lot of respect for many Republicans. Donald Trump is not one of them. But in the New York legislature, I have tremendous respect for a lot of Republicans, and I'm not the one to say vote Democrat, but
Right.
on this subject of this legislation, we're going to just talk about the process and what actually happened.
Right.
And, I got to say, I really think that the Republicans did not do the right thing. And the reason why is all of the sponsors on this legislation, and there was, I have reviewed all of them. Okay, they are my heroes. Okay, I think they're really wonderful people. They're all Democrats.
Now, a year ago,
Okay.
Sean, let's be honest, that would have been, given the people you're about to talk about, that would not have been a statement I would expect.
No, I would have. So Julia Salazar, for instance, is a Democratic socialist on the same team as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and you know that that's far left of center from.
Yes.
So look, I'm not here to talk about Democratic socialism as it compares to my politics or whatever. This particular legislation is solid and it's all right. And Julia Salazar, as a human being, whatever her influence on this legislation was, as far as I'm concerned, beyond reproach. And it's worthy of the deepest reflection and analysis and study. Just like I would study a Supreme Court decision,
Right.
I would study Julia Salazar's work product on this particular
Judge it on its
subject.
merits.
And to the extent that the president ever is considering appointing a federal marijuana
Czar or something like that.
these people are the ones to consider. Okay, so they were all Democrats. All right, and these are not like they're like, I'm from New York. Jamal, he's from. It's like these guys from the Boogie Down Bronx. These are 38 my age.
Yeah.
These are people I would smoke weed with. Liz Kruger is like my mother. I don't want to go. It would take us too long.
Yes.
To I do want to speak to them. I am going to actually. One of my plans is I want to reach out to them and talk to them for us to speak to them. But
hopefully have some of them as guests on the podcast.
look, I'm just saying, to the extent that you guys are hostile to, and as marijuana operators, you've been it's been a strategy of evading government
Yes.
and law enforcement. It's these guys are government. They're saying, and you're going to see, we made a mistake with this legislation in the past. Look, just make some gestures towards being honest citizens at this point,
Right.
and that's how you protect yourself.
Yes.
So I don't want to go too far. I will say that it was all of the Republicans who voted against the legislation, and 3 Democrats in the state Senate voted against the legislation. Now, I don't think that it would be fair for me to say that I'm very disappointed in those 3 Democrats. I don't think that they should be flogged in the street or anything. Okay,
Let's
all right,
dial back.
all right.
You don't know this guy. He can go off the deep end.
From
with some of the
from
rhetoric.
Washington Square to Times Square. No, we don't need to
we're
do
not
that.
gonna
We're
say
not
that,
going to
Sean.
do that, and we're not going to do that. Okay, like I said, it's not about invective. But
No
what
tarring
is the,
and feathering,
What
no
is the
pillory and
reasoning though? For, like the trend now is toward legalization.
Yes.
The ball is rolling. Billions of dollars are up for grabs
Yes.
as taxable revenue. Republicans, Democrats, communists, American Nazis. We should all be in agreement
Yes.
that this should be something that people
This should be one that we could all agree on.
Okay, so that's all I really have to say about politics. I mean, these particular sponsors, these particular people, these 20 some odd people. I mean, maybe we will do a podcast series one time just talking to each of them, because I think that they're just, each and every one of them is just...
And you folks out there, as you're watching this, let us know in the comment section what you think would be appropriate content for a future podcast. This is only podcast number 2. So, we're doing this for you. We already have these conversations ourselves off camera. We're having these conversations on camera to bring you into the conversation. And, as Sean says, to change the conversation around marijuana and marijuana legislation.
So, but my mama said, if you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything at all. To the people who are against marijuana legislation, I really think you should reconsider your position. And to these senators, these particular senators, these New York senators, I have all of their names here. I just, for the sake of sparing time, I'm not going to read through all of them. But you're heroes to me. You've done what Democrats are supposed to do. Okay. Now this is one issue, so I'm not going to. If you're wondering like what my political orientation is, I'm ashamed to say that I'm a registered libertarian, which what that really means is that I have been disenchanted with the Democratic Party for a lot of reasons that I think are much better spelled out by podcasters such as Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro and Joe Rogan and these guys. They influenced me. I became disenchanted, but I
don't hold that against him.
No, well, but a phrase I stole from him is, "We're born again capitalists."
Yes.
I'm almost a born-again Democrat with this legislation. I really am. I'm still a registered libertarian, but I'm like, Democrats, at this point, like,
my joke has always been, just to interrupt, my joke has always been that libertarians are conservatives who are too embarrassed to identify as Republicans.
So, how do we approach the subject of statutory analysis? It's not from a political left versus right. I'm saying that it's a really good piece of legislation, and let's analyze it on its face, as much as possible, staying away from bipartisan political discussions, and say whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, this is how you want to approach this legislation, okay? And I'm interested in speaking to conservative voices and ideas on the subject. So,
because as you say, changing the conversation, we're looking to not have a conversation about politics. We're looking to have a conversation about policy, not who can we drag, who can we score cheap talking points against. But legislation is designed to help organize and coordinate a structured society. So first of all, one of the things and we've talked about this off camera, we're looking to set a precedent here. Look, you're the citizens of New York. You're the citizens of the United States. You can look at, some legislation is kind of obfuscated and full of dense language, but not all of it. It's readable. It's readable,
and that's the purpose of this discussion, is to show that, like, you can smoke a joint with an intelligent human being and reason through a piece of legislation. Yeah. That's what we're showing.
It's comprehensible.
And I think this particular legislation happens to be interesting, very interesting, and very rich. So those are a couple of points to consider as we're reviewing it. The other lens around which is to reiterate, I'm speaking to marijuana operators and the marijuana operators and consumers that the legislation was designed to address. If you're selling marijuana, if you're growing marijuana, if you're smoking marijuana, what exactly does how many plants can I have? How many, how do I file ultimate, it's going to take time, but the statute is not 1,000 pages. It's about 145 pages, and
which honestly surprised me when he told me that. I was thinking more it was like, the size of a Oxford dictionary.
The tax code is like that, or more. The tax code is like 100 Oxford dictionaries. You're never going to read through the tax code like this. So right now we're doing one episode a week. Okay, I think that this is. I'm optimistic that there's going to be some viewership for this, and then as there becomes more of a demand, we'll explore producing content on a more consistent basis.
On demand, as you guys request.
Because we all have to eat, and we all have to do what we do. There's other things.
Got to pay the bills.
There's other responsibilities that we have,
and we don't sell marijuana, so we got to do other things to make our money. Just putting that out there.
Second to the marijuana consumer, I'm speaking to the population generally. As I said, billions and billions of dollars are up for grabs. Culture. This has the potential to really have significant impact. We're trying to make the conversation about reparations. That's a serious conversation.
And also, we're born-again capitalists. So look, if you're in the New York City area, if you own a restaurant, if you own a mom and pop shop, if you are a B&B operator, okay, marijuana tourism is going to become a thing.
I'm also, second then is, we're talking to the European Union and to the international community, because marijuana is illegal, in most. So we want to drive the conversation around, international law. It's defined as it's scheduled ridiculously under international law. We want
Crazy.
to change the international conversation
And
as
also,
well.
until it happens, hey, come to New York, make New York Amsterdam again.
The probably last and certainly not least is we're talking to our clients specifically, that we're
Yes.
trying to people who are under our retainer, and we're trying to essentially represent a class. I want to make that as I want as many clients as possible, so that I have as much bargaining power
Yes.
with the legislature as possible.
In strength, there is numbers.
Right,
So
so-
let's come together. And,
So-
and as Sean says, to not only to change the conversation, to drive the conversation. If it's one or two people out there, come on. There's hundreds of y'alls out there currently selling weed on the street. If we all band together, then we form a united front, and we influence what the legislation does and how it reacts and responds. And that's what we're looking to do here.
So all of that was intended to preface what we're about to do, which is read the language of the legislation. Okay, so we're gonna just the tip. I shouldn't. We're gonna approach this delicately.
That's what she said.
We're not gonna dive into the most complicated parts of this. All right. The preface was hopefully arouse interest in the subject, and I think the introduction and the legislative findings and the definition of terms, which is the first article, is is a good place to start, and and there's a lot of content there for us to analyze as well.
Let's do
So, introduction to the statute, an act in relation. Oh, and interrupt me with any comments,
Sure.
questions, or whatever.
Will do.
An act in relation to constituting Chapter 7A of the Consolidated Laws. Okay, the Consolidated Laws are essentially all of the laws of New York State. So it's like if you want to look up, the Family Court Act, you go to the Consolidated Laws. So this is Chapter 7A. I don't know what Chapter 6A is, but it's probably something more or less unrelated. It's not,
Right.
but that's the Consolidated Laws, are where all of the the laws are in New York. And each state kind of has that.
Right.
So that's where the state laws are. That's where the statutes are. Then the city has, like, the MTA has its specific little
Right.
rules and regulations. In relation to the creation of a new Office of Cannabis Management as an independent entity within the Division of Alcoholic Beverage Control, providing for the licensure of persons authorized to cultivate, process, distribute, and sell cannabis, and the use of cannabis by persons aged 21 or older. All right, that's pretty clear.
Okay.
Like, you don't need a law degree to understand. They're talking about we're creating a new Office of Cannabis Management. We've got a liquor board, we've got a
Right.
tobacco board.
Right.
Tobacco has its own. To sell tobacco, you need a license.
Exactly.
To sell liquor, you need a license. To sell marijuana, you're going to need a license now. And there's reasons why. You don't want it to just be
Right.
carte blanche, right? I don't, at least. I mean,
No,
so
it makes sense. It's going to be regulated in the same way other consumable intoxicants are.
now they're going to get into the full scope of all the areas of the law that this is going to impact.
Okay.
To amend the public health law in relation to the description of cannabis. So, in other words, to remove it as like a Schedule 1 or
which
whatever.
is always bullshit, and everybody knew this.
Right. To amend the penal law in relation to the growing and use of cannabis by persons 21 years of age or older, right? So, in other words, it's not a crime anymore. You can smoke it in the street. It's
And they're not going to use it as an excuse to lock people up.
in relation to the growing and use of cannabis by persons 21 years of age or older, to amend the tax law in relation to providing for the levying of taxes on cannabis, to amend the criminal procedure law, the civil practice law and rules, the general business law, the state finance law, the executive law, the penal law. They say that again.
Right.
I wonder if that was a typographical error.
Or maybe they just want to drive that point home.
Perhaps, I don't know. And what you'll find is that the parts that have you scratching your head will have the judges scratching theirs. Okay? The Alcoholic Beverage Control Law, the General Obligations Law, the Social Services Law, the Labor Law, the Family Court Act, and the Vehicle and Traffic Law in relation to making conforming changes, to amend the Public Health Law in relation to the definition of smoking, to amend the State Financial Law in relation to establishing the New York State Cannabis Review Fund, the New York State Drug Treatment and Public Education Fund, and the New York Community Grants Reinvestment Fund. Okay.
Okay. Now, it sounds to me, just in summary, that they're saying, hey, you know what? we're not just looking to make this not illegal. We're looking at how do we assimilate this into, because they're saying the business law, the finance law. So they're looking at this as like, this is going to be a product like selling a carton of Marlboros or selling a six-pack Corona or whatever.
Well, and also, and this is not spelled out in as much detail, at least not in the introduction in the statutes in the other jurisdictions. But when I said the consolidated laws, all the law, what I just said was essentially there's thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of books of laws, that have to be changed. So when people are talking about legalization, you have to respect that there's a whole process that has to happen. It's not like you gotta go through that process.
And something in all the times we've been talking about it, I never considered. It's like, right, in order to make these changes, you're going to have to change the definition, because that's always been one of the arguments against marijuana. Well, it's a Schedule 1 drug. And, just for those who don't know, Schedule 1 means having no medicinal use whatsoever.
Yeah, and also like severe, like we should, very bad. It's like Schedule 1, like heroin isn't Schedule 1. Like it's very bad. All right, so then the next sentence is, to amend Chapter 90 of the Laws of 2014, amending the Public Health Law. That particular piece of legislation was also sponsored by Senators Rivera and Sepulveda, two of the sponsors. Say again?
Sepulveda.
Thank you. Two of the sponsors of this bill. The tax law, the state finance law, the general business law, the penal law again, and the criminal procedure law relating to medical use of marijuana in relation to the effectiveness thereof. Okay. To amend Chapter 74 of the laws of 1968 constituting the Urban Development Corporation Act. This is very interesting. See, this is the kind of thing that what I just said was difficult to digest, because they're kind of listing all of these like specific... Right. But when you look at like the meaning behind the phrases, it's actually very interesting. So the 1968 Urban Development Corporation Act is a very, like this, lofty piece of democratic legislation seeking to develop low-income housing as well as recreational and other facilities across the state. This is also a very interesting piece of legislation, and later sections will explain how the two are related, because they want to take some of these funds and direct it towards the areas that are defined by this statute. Okay? So this is what they've been doing for however many years it took them to draft this. Is they've been, analyzing all of the different areas of legislation and law that need to essentially be, and how to spell this out to properly address those.
What's the ripple effect?
Right.
And the things we've been talking about this for a couple of months now, and your comment has always been that you felt, and we started out this podcast with your statement that you feel of all of the state legislatures affecting the legalization for recreational use of marijuana, that this is one of the most well thought out and well crafted.
Yes. Well, what I just said, the other pieces of legislation that I'll be honest, I did not read through every single 16 pieces of legislation. I did read through several that I'm going to discuss once we get through this. But of the ones that I read, this introductory section was a sentence or two saying, because we want to have better managed police funds. It doesn't go. They did not go through this or to the extent that they did, it's spelled out later on in the in the statute. Right. But this is like this gives you it's a very strong preface, and it sets the tone for the rest. The introduction needs to be strong in any piece of writing, whether it's a piece of fiction or a statute. Because,
and I was just going to point out, this is just the introduction. We're not even really fully into the bill yet.
We're not even into the legislative finding and intent, which is another. It gets but this is important. Yeah. Okay, then. And the next sentence is actually very important. In relation to loans to social economic equity applicants. Before we even get to the legislative findings and intents, they're saying that the ones they've been throwing in Rikers for the past, century?
Decades.
Decades. All right, of course. You guys. What did I just say? How did I just phrase that? I'm sorry. I get stoned, and then I can't remember.
Funny how that happens.
And then I can't remember something that I just read, just a second ago. But in relation to loans to social and economic equity applicants, there are loans there for you now.
Yes, and it's stated in the introduction to the legislature. This isn't possibly, maybe. It's spelled out in black and white in the actual legislative act that's going to make this happen.
I'm saying thousands and thousands and thousands of tens of thousands of dollars.
Hundreds
if you
of thousands.
Perhaps
millions.
this is why we want you to talk to us, is because in addition, we have a strategy for you, which is in addition to going. This is why you want to incorporate. Right. This is why you want to launch a website. Exactly. This is why you want to start paying your taxes, because this is the reason why.
Pardon the dad joke, but he may be smoking a joint, but this is not a pipe dream.
No, not anymore. Not anymore. I mean, what your father, who excoriated you for smoking marijuana and for selling it, I'm going to disclose it. I'm going to go.
I was wondering if you were going to.
I'm going to go there. All right. If we're going to talk about fathers, and if you're going to say that, the truth is that my father was a purveyor of marijuana as a peacemaker in the '60s.
Yes. And I've known Sean since he was 16. I just discovered this yesterday.
Because it's not something my father would want discussed. And I told you this yesterday. And that's after we've become partners. Yeah. Okay. So my father. We're going to digress for a moment.
Yeah.
Because we're almost at the end of it, actually.
Yeah.
You know what? Yeah, we're almost at the end, but we are going to digress for one moment. So my father was a hippie in the 60s. And as such, he was selling marijuana in the streets of... And I don't know how he was going about it, but he was selling marijuana in New York. And after he died, I went through the safe deposit box, and I discovered the certificate of release from Rikers Island. And I, was in law school at the time, so I knew what it meant, and I knew how to read it. And I discussed it with my mother, and she said, okay, he never wanted you to find out. It was a secret that he never wanted to share with you. Yeah. It was something that he never wanted me to know about him, right. Essentially. But that's what happens. He went to jail for 1 year on Rikers Island. And let me tell you something.
A year of his life.
Let me tell you something. Rikers Island is one of the worst jails in the country.
And that's now.
That's now. In the 70s, it was not a friendly place for a young, Jewish hippie. Right. I can understand why he didn't want to. Yeah. And I know that he wouldn't want that discussed.
Right.
And, for the same reason that, how does that affected me and my life? You talk about generational trauma. It's right. I have struggled with addiction and alcoholism, and I've been arrested more times than I remember for marijuana over
right.
the years.
Right.
And these are not things that you are necessarily proud of or that you want to right. disclose to people. But my business plan, essentially, and what I'm telling other people, is that they should be completely honest right. about marijuana. Right. From yeah. this point forward,
and in the context of
and
our
so that's what I'm doing.
Yes.
I'm being, I'm spreading myself out for the, I'm placing myself on the vanguard in terms
yes.
of the advice that I'm giving people and the business that I'm trying
yes.
to create. So,
and this is an essential point, if I may.
Yes.
In the context of our conversation, and this is what I want those of you out here who are watching this to understand. We're looking to be 100% transparent. Sean is a no bullshit guy. He's smoking. That's not a prop. That's weed.
Oh no, this is the
okay.
Yeah.
And here's my point. Sean's father, who, as I know him, seemed to be a pretty decent, upright, white Jewish guy. His involvement in the marijuana trade was so shameful to him that he carried it to his death and never told his only child.
Never spoke to his only son.
Right, his only son. Now, what bodega owner, what dry cleaner owner, what auto repair shop owner is embarrassed by what they do for a living that they would take it to their grave and never speak to their child about?
Well, it was the shame that he had around that. He apparently what happened when he got arrested was he called his mother, my grandmother, and he was like, Ma, I need some help. And she was like, I told you to stay away from those hippies and that marijuana, and you did a very bad thing, and now you're going to have to face the consequences.
And he spent a year in jail.
And he spent a year in jail.
And we're looking to change it so that the folks out there now who are selling weed on the street, you're going to turn that into a legitimate business that you're not going to hide from your kid. You're going to hand down a legitimate business as a legacy to your grandchildren.
And to the extent that, and one level of analysis, psychological analysis of that story is that when I'm searching for the social equity applicant, I'm searching for my father, in a sense. You know, I'm looking to protect the interests of my father, and to that's what it means to me. You know, that's essentially what it means to me. So, you know, it's just marijuana. You know, things have depth. And this has significant depth and meaning, and the ability, I think, to bring a healing to the world, to this country, to this city, in a very meaningful way. To have a new conversation around a lot of things where we have to have some new conversations.
I just got to...
All right. So, well, let me continue.
No,
You'll sober up when I start reading
No. So I don't want to step over this. I don't want to step over this, dude. I had to take a pause because, dude, that hit me. I want you to understand this.
I know.
I've known you more than half your life at this point, and you know, I didn't grow up with my father. My stepdad was a pretty cool guy, but my folks split up when I was an infant because of whatever. So and I know what this has meant to you in terms of, you know, being a marijuana smoker and an advocacy, but when you said that in part you're searching for your father in this, that's fucking deep, dude. Yeah,
I mean, it is what it is. You know, I don't want to dwell on it beyond what was already said. And
I just very briefly, I want to say to the folks out there, this is how raw and real we're coming to you, folks. This isn't just some bullshit because we're trying to run some sort of a scam and drive up some clients. And because we are born-again capitalists.
We're doing the opposite of a scam. Like we said, our competitors in other states are charging $30,000 just to go through the license application. We're going to do everything.
Yes. Everything?
Everything! Okay, that you need to go to take you out of the gray and into the black. Okay, so with that being said, we are going to proceed with the black letter law, with our analysis, with our marijuana analysis of the marijuana legislation of the black letter law. Yes, I misspoke, but that's fine. Okay, so I said loans. Next, in relation to the loans to social economic equity applicants, that means, look, whatever we charge you, we'll get that back from you in a zero interest loan. You know, almost immediately. That's one of the things that's up for grabs right now.
How to apply and process paperwork to get those funds.
Because there's expenses. You know, like even we don't know exactly what the license fee is going to look like. I mean, we can look at other states and jurisdictions. We don't really know that right now, but things are going to cost money. If you want to go through about this right, you know, if you had you know, some assets to work with, it would obviously make things better. I like to believe that you can create soup from a stone, you know, and that if you have no money,
favorite parables from back in the day.
If you have no money, you watch our I just hit the mic. Watch our series, and we'll still explain, you know, kind of what you need to do.
Because what we're looking, as Sean mentioned, we're looking to prevent the venture capitalists from the West Coast to come in here and swoop in and take advantage of things that are intended for you guys out there.
I'm from Wall Street, okay? So excuse me, did you say venture cap? No. What we are going to do is we are going to explain to the venture capitalists on the West Coast how this is supposed to go down, because this is New York. They don't know. I understand that they passed it first, but this is New York, okay? So what I want the 5-Borough Equity Alliance to do...
Social Equity Alliance.
I'm the one who created it. Yes. Constantly having to correct...
You might have a little bit to do with the weed, folks, I'm just saying.
I could smoke a little... I'm not saying I want to quit, but I could maybe a little bit less. But you know, that is what I want the 5-Borough Social Equity Alliance to do, is to lead the charge in national legalization and international legalization to make sure that the funds are properly directed to the state and to the community. Yes, and that it is not just taken by venture capitalists.
Another money grab by people who already have money to make more money.
For people, it's not something for the 1% to take. And I'm not a communist, like I said. I'm a born again capitalist.
I coined the phrase.
And actually, what I'm saying is I don't want the government to be the one. I'm saying thank you, government, for kind of getting out of our way.
Job well done.
Job well done. But what we're trying to organize so that we can again operate from a standpoint of collective bargaining in the courtroom, in the halls of Congress, and in the marketplace and in the streets. That's essentially what we're trying to do. Okay, so to continue, pass the loans, providing increased drug recognition awareness. Oh, these guys are really brilliant, man, because I've been saying this for years. Does marijuana mitigate against opioid addiction, alcoholism? I'll tell you what, it has for me. I went to rehab once, and I was talking about the effectiveness of AA, and the counselor said, you know what? We were talking about the metrics of success. Does it work? Does it not work? And he said, you know what? It's a metric of 1. Does it work for you? Because if it works for you, that's all that matters. And you know what? AA, as it happens, doesn't really work for me. But marijuana has mitigated against my addictions to alcohol, to opioids, to amphetamines, to the things that I've abused at various points in my life. Like I wonder if people going through opioid withdrawals, if they just ate a bunch of edibles, could kind of if that would make the process a little easier. I quit tobacco. So to go a little deeper into my personal history, I was sober for off of everything.
Yeah.
Everything for 2.5 years. Didn't drink, didn't smoke weed, but I did continue to chew tobacco. I quit smoking. I was chewing tobacco. So addicted to tobacco. The marijuana legislation passed, and I said, you know what? I'm just going to allow myself just unmitigated access to marijuana, and I stopped chewing tobacco, and I'm a happy marijuana customer. For that reason, is marijuana addiction potentially a problem? Yes, but it's
we're not bullshitting about this. We're not pretending that this is some Pollyanna pie in the sky, utopian solution.
The next thing they say is advanced roadside impaired driver enforcement training. Okay, listen. I can smoke marijuana. I don't drive, to be honest with you. I ride an electric skateboard that goes approximately 29 miles an hour. And I love to smoke marijuana and ride my skateboard all over New York City. So if they start doing that test, I'm going to be... Because I don't think... I would be more interested in them doing a double-blind study of how marijuana affects your driving before a priori saying that they need to, make sure that they're not smoking marijuana and driving. Maybe it makes you a better driver. Did you ever think about that? So you need to prove... They're saying that because I think they've dealt with a lot of pushback from the Republicans saying we want to make sure that...
And also there's a tendency to overgeneralize and say, well, if drunk driving is a problem, then stone driving has to be a problem.
Right, and I'm saying that I don't think it is. I personally don't think it is, and that before you talk to me about doing roadside testing, prove to me that marijuana compromises a man's ability to drive.
That would take having a new and enlightened conversation around the whole subject.
Well, we're going to get to that because they created in the board. When we talk about the cannabis board, there's many positions that are designed whose entire job is to deal with that. So. But this is why we need a collective bargaining thing, because I'll be the one to push back at them and say, why are we, wasting resources?
Yeah. And if one person says that, then you're just going to get shouted down by the conservative voices and the people who just take a typical attitude towards things, and that's understandable. But collectively, if people come, then again, we can drive the conversation and move in the direction. Because, as Sean said, maybe it improves your driving, maybe it doesn't. But right now, we don't know.
We don't know. But so now, and also, how does it? Maybe it's also affect we mentioned the public health law, and the statute gets into this in later sections about the effect that it might, the usefulness that it might have in psychiatry, The only thing it's recognized for right now is post-traumatic stress disorder, and there's a lot of people who are much more expert on the science around this than I will ever be. But what we would want to see is that category telescope, and we would want to see insurance start paying for marijuana.
Right.
Okay.
But let's have, if you'll pardon again the dad joke, let's have a sober conversation about marijuana.
Right. For the detection of cannabis impaired driving, I said that providing for the transfer of employees and functions from the Department of Health to the Office of Cannabis Management. So this is where they're sourcing their people from a human resources standpoint. Yes. They're sourcing them from,
from a human resource and a medical specific background.
They could source them, for instance, from the corrections, the corrections department,
Yeah, good luck
or
with that.
or the tax department,
or the DMV for crying out loud.
Right, or any other department. But they're doing it from the public health department, and that's good. That means there'll be hopefully doctors and
it also indicates that they're actually taking this seriously and they're not just paying lip service to it.
Okay. Department of Health to the Department to repeal certain provisions of the public health law relating to growing of cannabis and medical use of marijuana. I think that speaks for itself. To repeal Article 22 of the penal law relating to offenses involving marijuana. Again, that speaks for itself. To repeal paragraph F of subdivision 2 of section 805 of the general business law relating to drug-related paraphernalia. Now, and all that means is we don't have to explore the specific language. All that means, rolling papers, bongs, water pipes, all of that. That's all that's been legislated against, where they have to say for tobacco use only. Now that's not there anymore. Okay, and to repeal.
I always bought my bamboos and jokers for tobacco use only.
And then this is just a catch-all provision, and to repeal certain provisions of the penal law relating to making conforming changes. Okay, so that was the introduction to the act. Okay, again, it goes far deeper than the other jurisdictions, and they're not done. Okay, in terms of even the introduction. So now we're gonna get into it. Short title, Article 1, short title, legislative findings and intent. All right, those are the three things that we're going to be reading right now, and we're approaching a conclusion. I think. I mean, in the next, if you want me to be quiet, you can interrupt me.
I was just wondering if you wanted to go further, if you wanted to kind of put a pin in it until the next episode. That's your choice. I think that right there was a lot for people to digest.
Well, okay, then you know what, we will. There's a couple. Then you know what, the next section was the legislative findings and intent, where they dive deeper into some of the subject we already explored. And then the definitions. Right. So you know what? We are going to put a pin in it. That is what we're going to talk about next time. However, there are things that I do want. I don't want to. There's a few things
you give
I want to.
Preview.
But that's
coming on the next episode.
No, there are things that I want to talk about on this episode. First, I want to talk a little bit about, just for a few minutes, about the other jurisdictions. California, okay,
here we go,
passed 31-7. Again, like New York, all the Democrats, voting for, and the few, they don't have a lot of Republicans in the Senate there. And when I looked at the legislation, it's just not as comprehensive as New York. Alaska was an interesting jurisdiction. They have a long history since 1975, when they first decriminalized it.
First decriminalized it?
Yeah, and then they it was like you'd get a fine, and then they recriminalized it. And there's a lot. The history of marijuana in Alaska is very interesting. But these are the important points to note: that it passed by way of an initiated by way of a ballot measure. Okay, as opposed to what happened here, where the state legislature passed it. In other words,
if I understand that correctly, that means the people decided.
The people decided, and it was decided 53.23% to 46.77%, which is actually kind of close, right? So of the 26 states that provide some form of initiative, 21 states allow for citizens to initiate state statutes. So that's not possible in all states. And this shows you how there are real differences between states and kind of the process in states. So these are all things to consider. Like if you live in one of the states where it hasn't been legalized yet, well, what's the process of legalization? Right. How do you go through that? Yeah. I have a strategic idea around that I'm going to share at the end of the episode.
Okay.
Arizona also passed via ballot initiative, as it did in Alaska. Okay. Colorado was via amending the state constitution. That's another way. You amend the constitution. And another way to amend would be to amend the United States Constitution.
Yeah.
That's not an easy task, and I think there's a much easier avenue that we can explore that I'm going to explain. Very soon, Illinois became the first to legalize for adult use of cannabis through legislation rather than ballot initiative. So the law was enacted on January 1st, 2020, with licensed sellers providing the herb at the retail level. Okay. So I just wanted to provide some kind of cross-jurisdictional analysis of what's going on. I mean, it's not as detailed and comprehensive as you would need if you were a lawyer, but if you're just trying to wrap your brain around the marijuana legislation, I think that's a good way to start. Now, how do we drive the process of national legalization?
How do we do that, Sean?
I'm going to provide an example. In 2015, Nebraska and Oklahoma attempted to file suit in federal court to stop the implementation of Amendment 64, which legalized marijuana in Colorado, claiming that Colorado cannabis was harming their localities and should be preempted by federal law. Okay, sheriffs in Kansas joined suit. And if their effort prevailed, it could have potentially led to all state level legalization laws being struck down.
Now, here's the thing. Just to interject, I'm going to assume that these were conservatives trying to do that, and I always find it odd that aren't conservatives the one who are always talking about states' rights and complaining about federal encroachment and overreach?
Before we explore that, let me just wrap up because this is the strategy.
Yeah.
Do it openly. Do it honestly. Bring the discussion to, if you get arrested, this is why I talk about collective bargaining and coming together so that you will have resources that lawyers who will represent you in court, etc. And let's drive the question to the Supreme Court. Because now that it's legal in so many jurisdictions, I believe that this is ripe for the Supreme Court to legislate that. That was a Freudian slip. What I just said.
The legislature.
Well, because actually what I just said is a very controversial strategic initiative, and I think the Republicans will excoriate for this. No, because that's what they say, that the judiciary is not supposed to legislate from the bench. And what I just said actually speaks to exactly why this strategy is very questionable, because the process according to the Republicans is that it's supposed to go according to the state level. You got to bring the ballot via ballot initiative, change the Constitution. The senators need to discuss, put pressure on your senators, but you don't bring it to the Supreme Court for them to just do it in one shot.
It's a conservative state bordering on Colorado, and you want to override Colorado's state legislation.
And my point is, I'm to a certain extent a mercenary, okay? Which is to say, what is the most effective strategy? And to the extent that this is a strategy that is most likely to succeed, I think that it is drive the question to the Supreme Court, and I believe that the Supreme Court, even the conservative justices, will reach a favorable verdict, okay? I want to close now with a poem. All right.
Very nice.
Today, interestingly, is Gay Pride. I do not happen to be a homosexual. If you're wondering the nature of our relationship, we've never gotten into that with one another. No, certainly not. But it is Pride, and I want to.
As Seinfeld said, not that there's anything wrong.
I want to honor that, and I wanted to read an excerpt from a poem by Oscar Wilde, "The Ballad of Reading Jail." And Oscar Wilde was a flamboyant homosexual in a time in England when
that was not the vibe.
It was against the law, the common law sodomy, which was actually against the law in the United States until I believe the Supreme Court decision was Romer v. Evans, which finally struck that down. And it was the 70s, which finally struck down.
That recently, folks. I was a teenager then.
That was not that long ago, So, Oscar Wilde was a, flamboyant man, and he had a lover, and Lover's father did not approve of the relationship for obvious reasons, and he left a note for Oscar Wilde one day at his hotel desk, just saying to the notorious sodomite Oscar Wilde, which is basically like calling him a faggot or something.
Yeah.
It's just a disrespectful, pejorative thing.
That was the florid language way of doing it.
Right, and it still kind of resonates with that, So Oscar Wilde was very upset, and he wanted to sue the man for slander, and his friends and advisors told him not to do it. You don't want to go there.
Pump the brakes, Oscar.
But he was very insulted, and he did exactly that, And I think the reason why he did that was because he was trying, I think, in a misguided way, to drive the conversation around gay rights, and again, this is a legislation like the marijuana legislation that was that has a long history. It was always very questionable.
Yeah.
There's and
he, but a vanguard sounds like he was a bit ahead of his time.
Oh yeah. Well, we need more. We need more souls like his, And so he was a playwright, a poet, and a socialite before Twitter, and just a very But he didn't heed his friend's counsel, and he sued his lover's father in court for slander, and his lover's I forget the names of the parties, but the defense to slander is, well, what I'm saying is true. I didn't slander him. He is a sodomite. He's a man who practices this thing, and he defeated the petition on those grounds. After which an inquest for sodomy ensued against.
He opened up a can of worms.
Yeah, and Oscar Wilde treated his case the way he treated his whole life. Like when he would travel, they would at customs they would say, "Do you have anything to declare?" He'd say, "I have nothing to declare except my genius." So that's how
I love the moxie of that. That's balls, folks.
That's how he
balls,
went about his trial. So they would bring witnesses like these boys from brothels, and they'd say, "Did you sleep with these boys, Oscar?" And he said, "No, they're too ugly." Like, I would never.
I have standards after all.
I would never, and eventually they dealt with him. They listened to his antics for the course of the trial, and then they sentenced him to several years in Reading jail, where they destroyed him. He died very shortly after that, and he was never the same. He was never the same, and he died very shortly after that. And he witnessed the execution of a man while he was in prison, and he wrote what I consider to be the one of the most beautiful poems in the English language, which would actually probably take me about 45 minutes to read. It's an epic. Right. I can't. So this comes sort of at the verses that I'm going to read come at the conclusion. But I want to speak to I'm saying that I think the marijuana legislation is a good thing, and that legalization is a good thing. The Republicans apparently. A lot of them are resisting it, and I would urge them to, reconsider. Ultimately, do I know what's right or what's wrong? I know not whether laws be right or whether laws be wrong. All that we know who lie in jail is that the wall is strong, and that each day is like a year whose days are long. But this I know, that every law that men have made for man since first man took his brother's life and the sad world began, but straws the wheat and saves the chaff with a most evil fan. This too I know, and wise it were if each could know the same, that every prison that men build is built with bricks of shame and bound with bars, lest Christ should see how men their brothers maim. With bars they blur the gracious moon and blind the goodly sun, and they do well to hide their hell, for in it things are done that Son of God nor Son of Man ever should look upon. The vilest deeds, like poison weeds, bloom well in prison air. It is only what is good in man that wastes and withers there. Pale anguish keeps the heavy gate, and the warder in despair. For they starve the little frightened child till it weeps both night and day, and they scourge the weak and flog the fool and jibe the old and gray. And some grow mad, and all grow bad, and none a word may say. Each narrow cell in which we dwell is a foul and dark latrine, and the fetid breath of living death chokes up each grated screen, and all but lust is turned to dust in humanity's machine. So let's have a new conversation about crime and punishment. Let's begin with the marijuana legislation. Let's Let's heal.
And that's just the beginning. And
Let's-
really,
I was gonna say I smoked 2 joints when I read the legislation, but I only smoked the one. So maybe when we get a little more confident, we'll
Yes.
we'll go a little deeper. But thank you for listening, and we hope that you listen to us in the future as well.
okay.
Thank
Everybody,
you.
be well.
Bye.
Thanks.